Welcome to English Vibes Hub, the channel where you can improve your English speaking and listening skills in a fun and engaging way. I'm Emma, and I'm excited to be here with Liam today to talk about mastering daily conversations at the coffee shop. How's your day going so far, Liam?
It's going great, thanks for asking. I just got my morning coffee, and I'm feeling energized and ready to chat. You know, I was thinking, have you ever noticed how difficult it can be to have a conversation in English at a coffee shop, especially if you're not a native speaker? The noise, the distractions, the pressure to order quickly, it can be overwhelming.
Absolutely, and that's exactly why we're here to help. We'll be sharing some tips and tricks to make your coffee shop conversations smoother and more enjoyable. Let's start with some basic phrases you can use when ordering your coffee. For example, you can say, "I'll have a latte, please," or "Can I get a cappuccino?" But what if you want to ask for something specific, like a certain type of milk or flavoring?
That's a great point, Emma, and that's where phrasal verbs come in. For instance, you can say, "Can you add some syrup to my coffee?" Or "I'd like to pick up my order at the counter." The phrasal verb add in this context means to include something extra, and pick up means to collect or retrieve something. Let's break it down and explore more examples.
Exactly, and another useful phrasal verb is turn down. For example, if the barista asks if you want your coffee extra hot, you can say no, "I'll turn it down, thanks." This means to reduce the intensity or volume of something. It's a great way to show you're in control of your order and can communicate your preferences effectively.
I love that example, Emma. And what about the phrase "get a refill"? This is a common expression used in coffee shops, especially if you have a loyalty card or a reusable cup. It means to get a new drink, usually at a discounted price, and it's a great way to save money and reduce waste. Can you think of a situation where you would use this phrase, Emma?
Actually, yes, I have a reusable cup, and I always ask for a refill when I go to my favorite coffee shop. It's become a habit for me, and the baristas know me by name now. They'll often ask how my day is going or what I'm working on, and we'll chat for a bit. It's a great way to practice your English skills in a real-life setting. Don't you think, Liam?
Definitely, and it's not just about the language. It's also about the cultural nuances and social norms. For instance, in some countries, it's customary to greet the barista with a smile and a friendly hello, while in others, it's more formal. Being aware of these differences can help you navigate the conversation more smoothly and avoid any misunderstandings.
That's so true, Liam. And speaking of cultural differences, have you ever noticed how some coffee shops have a very distinct atmosphere or vibe? For example, some might be more quiet and studious, while others are more lively and social. How do you think this affects the conversation? And what kind of language would you use in each setting?
That's an interesting question, Emma. I think the atmosphere of the coffee shop can definitely influence the conversation. For example, if you're in a quiet coffee shop, you might use more subdued language and avoid loud laughter or boisterous conversations. On the other hand, if you're in a more lively coffee shop, you might use more energetic and playful language to match the vibe. What do you think, Emma?
I think that's a great point, Liam. And it's also important to consider the role of nonverbal communication in coffee shop conversations. For example, making eye contact, using gestures, and varying your tone of voice can all help to convey your message and build a connection with the other person. Can you think of some nonverbal cues that are commonly used in coffee shop conversations? Liam?
Well, one example that comes to mind is the use of body language to show you're engaged and interested in the conversation. For instance, you might lean forward, nod your head, or use open and relaxed gestures to show you're listening and care about what the other person is saying. What about you, Emma? Can you think of any other nonverbal cues that are important in coffee shop conversations?
Actually, yes. I think another important nonverbal cue is the use of facial expressions. For example, if you're ordering a coffee and the barista asks how your day is going, you might smile and say it's going great, thanks, to show you're friendly and approachable. On the other hand, if you're having a bad day, you might use a more subdued expression to show you're not feeling your best. It's all about being aware of your nonverbal signals and using them to build a connection with the other person.
I love that example, Emma, and it's also important to consider the role of tone of voice in coffee shop conversations. For instance, if you're ordering a coffee and you use a friendly and upbeat tone, the barista is more likely to respond in kind and engage in a conversation with you. On the other hand, if you use a gruff or unfriendly tone, the barista might be less likely to want to chat with you. What do you think, Emma?
I think that's a great point, Liam. And it's also worth considering the language we use to show appreciation and gratitude in coffee shop conversations. For example, you might say thank you so much or I really appreciate it to show you value the barista's help and service. Can you think of some other phrases we could use to show appreciation, Liam?
Well, one example that comes to mind is the phrase "you're a lifesaver." This is a fun and playful way to express gratitude, especially if the barista has helped you out in a pinch or saved you from a long wait. What about you, Emma? Can you think of any other phrases that might be useful in this context?
Actually, yes. I think another useful phrase is I owe you one. This is a casual and friendly way to show you appreciate someone's help, and it can be used in a variety of contexts, including coffee shop conversations. But what if you want to show appreciation in a more formal or professional setting? Liam, how would you express gratitude in that case?
That's a great question, Emma. I think in a more formal or professional setting, you might use phrases like "I appreciate your assistance" or "thank you for your help." These phrases are more polished and formal, and they show you value the other person's time and expertise. But what about in a coffee shop setting, where the atmosphere is more casual and relaxed? How would you adapt your language to fit the context, Emma?
I think that's a great question, Liam. And I think the key is to be aware of the context and adjust your language accordingly. For example, if you're in a busy coffee shop and you need to order quickly, you might use shorter and more concise language to get your point across. On the other hand, if you're in a quieter coffee shop and you have more time to chat, you might use more elaborate and descriptive language to build a connection with the barista. What do you think, Liam?
I think that's a great point, Emma. And it's also worth considering the role of idiomatic expressions in coffee shop conversations. For instance, you might say it's been a wild ride to describe a busy morning, or "I'm running on fumes" to describe how you're feeling after a long day. These expressions add flavor and interest to your language, and they can help you build a connection with the other person. Can you think of some other idiomatic expressions that might be useful in coffee shop conversations, Emma?
Actually, yes. I think another useful expression is to be in a pickle. This means to be in a difficult or challenging situation, and it can be used to add humor and interest to your conversation. For example, you might say "I'm in a pickle because I forgot my wallet at home" to describe a frustrating situation. What about you, Liam? Can you think of any other expressions that might be useful in this context?
Well, one example that comes to mind is the phrase "to cut to the chase." This means to get to the point or the most important part of the conversation, and it can be used to show you're interested in the other person's thoughts and opinions. For example, you might say "let's cut to the chase" and talk about the real issue here to focus the conversation and build a connection with the other person. What do you think, Emma?
I think that's a great point, Liam. And it's also worth considering the role of storytelling in coffee shop conversations. For instance, you might share a personal anecdote or a funny story to build a connection with the barista and add interest to the conversation. Can you think of a time when you used storytelling in a coffee shop conversation? Liam.
Actually, yes. I remember one time when I was traveling, and I struck up a conversation with a barista at a local coffee shop. I shared a story about my travels, and the barista shared a story about their own experiences. It was a great way to build a connection and learn more about the local culture. What about you, Emma? Can you think of a time when you used storytelling in a coffee shop conversation?
I think that's a great example, Liam. And I think the key is to be genuine and authentic in your storytelling. Don't be afraid to share your thoughts and experiences, and be open to hearing the other person's stories as well. It's a great way to build a connection and create a positive and engaging conversation. Let's keep exploring this topic and see where it takes us, Liam.
I completely agree with you, Emma. Being genuine and authentic is crucial in any conversation, especially when it comes to storytelling. It's amazing how a simple story can break the ice and create a connection with someone.
Absolutely, Liam. And I think that's why it's so important to be a good listener as well. When you're actively listening to someone, you're showing them that you value and respect their thoughts and opinions.
That's a great point, Emma. And it's also important to know how to pick up on cues and follow up on what the other person is saying. This can help to keep the conversation flowing and prevent those awkward silences.
Exactly. And picking up on cues is a great example of a phrasal verb that we can use in this context. It means to notice and respond to something that someone has said or done.
Right? So if someone mentions that they are interested in a particular topic, you can pick up on that cue and ask them more questions about it.
That's a great example, Liam. And another phrasal verb that we can use in this context is bring up. This means to introduce a new topic or subject into a conversation.
I see what you mean. So if you want to bring up a new topic, you could say something like, "Speaking of travel, have you ever been to Europe?"
Exactly. And it's also important to know how to wrap up a conversation when it's time to say goodbye. This means to bring the conversation to a close in a polite and friendly way.
That's a great point, Emma. And wrapping up a conversation can be as simple as saying, "It was great catching up with you. Let's do it again soon."
Right, and another idiom that we can use in this context is break the ice. This means to do or say something that helps to relax and make people feel more comfortable in a social situation.
Ah, I love that idiom. So, if you're at a party and you don't know anyone, you could try to break the ice by asking someone a question or telling a joke.
Exactly, and it's also important to know how to get the ball rolling in a conversation. This means to start a conversation or activity and get it moving.
That's a great point, Emma. So, if you're at a coffee shop and you want to get the ball rolling, you could ask the person next to you about their day or what they're working on.
Right, and let's do a role play to practice some of these phrasal verbs and idioms. Liam, can you start by ordering a coffee and then picking up on a cue that I give you?
Sure thing, Emma. I'll go ahead and order a coffee. I'll have a large coffee, please.
That'll be $2, 50 please. And by the way, I love your scarf. Where did you get it?
Thanks, I got it on a trip to Spain. I picked up on your cue, and now I can follow up with more information about my trip.
That's great, Liam. You're really good at picking up on cues. Now, let's try to bring up a new topic. What do you think about the new coffee shop that just opened up down the street?
I haven't been there yet, but I've heard great things about it. Maybe we can get the ball rolling and plan a time to go there together.
That sounds like a great idea, Liam. And I think we can both wrap up this conversation by saying that it's been great chatting with each other, and we should do it again soon.
Absolutely, Emma. It's been great chatting with you, and I'm looking forward to our next conversation. Maybe we can break the ice with a new topic or activity next time.
Sounds like a plan, Liam. And I think we can both agree that practicing these phrasal verbs and idioms has really helped us to improve our conversation skills.
Definitely, Emma. I feel like I'm getting better at picking up on cues and following up with interesting questions and topics.
That's great to hear, Liam. And I think we can both keep working on getting the ball rolling in our conversations and wrapping up them in a polite and friendly way.
Absolutely, Emma. I'm looking forward to our next conversation and seeing how we can continue to improve our skills.
Me too, Liam. And maybe next time we can practice some more phrasal verbs and idioms, like turning the conversation around or taking the conversation to the next level.
That sounds like a great idea, Emma. I'm always up for learning new phrases and improving my conversation skills.
Well, I think we've made some great progress so far, Liam. And I'm excited to see how we can continue to improve and become more confident in our conversations.
Me too, Emma. Let's keep practicing and pushing the boundaries of our conversation skills.
I like that phrase, Liam. Pushing the boundaries is a great way to describe what we're trying to do with our conversations.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to challenge ourselves and become more confident and proficient in our conversation skills.
Well, I think we're off to a great start, Liam. And I'm excited to see where our conversations take us from here.
Me too, Emma. Let's keep the conversation going and see where it takes us.
I'm so glad we decided to keep the conversation going, Liam. I feel like we've covered some really useful topics for mastering daily conversations at the coffee shop.
Absolutely, Emma. And I think our listeners will really appreciate the examples we've shared. Speaking of which, let's talk about the phrasal verb pick up. Can you explain what it means in the context of a conversation?
Sure thing, Liam. So, when we say pick up a conversation, we mean to continue talking about a topic that was previously discussed. For example, let's pick up where we left off yesterday and discuss the new coffee shop that just opened up downtown.
That's really helpful, Emma. And what about the idiom break the ice? How can our listeners use that in a conversation at the coffee shop?
Well, Liam, break the ice means to say or do something that helps people feel more comfortable and start talking to each other. For instance, you could say, "Wow, I love your scarf. Where did you get it?" To break the ice and start a conversation with someone.
I see what you mean, Emma. And I think that leads nicely into the phrasal verb follow up. Can you give an example of how our listeners could use that in a conversation?
Definitely, Liam. So, if you're talking to someone at the coffee shop and you want to ask about something they mentioned earlier, you could say, "I wanted to follow up on what you said about the new coffee blend. Have you tried it yet?"
That's a great example, Emma. And finally, let's talk about the idiom call it a day. What does that mean, and how can our listeners use it in a conversation?
Well, Liam, call it a day means to stop what you're doing and go home. For example, if you're chatting with someone at the coffee shop and you realize it's getting late, you could say, "I think I'm going to call it a day and head home." It was great catching up with you.
I think that's a perfect way to wrap up our conversation, Emma. And I'm so grateful to our listeners for joining us on this journey to master daily conversations at the coffee shop.
Me too, Liam. It's been an absolute pleasure sharing our tips and examples with everyone. And before we go, I just want to say thank you to each and every one of our listeners for tuning in to English Vibes Hub.
Yes, thank you all so much for your support. If you liked this episode, please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel at English Vibes Hub S6W for more English listening practice and conversation tips.